Hey guys, so glad you're all here. Um, Today I'm going to be sharing with you Chapter 3 of Saving Destiny, Spilling Secrets. I already read this chapter before, but I already read up to Chapter 17 actually. And there's a lot more to the novel, which I'll share with you. But I recently got back in time, and for the last two live streams, posted the first two chapters of the book Saving Destiny with a whole lot of edits in it. For those of you who aren't familiar with my novel, Saving Destiny and alternating viewpoints of Destiny and her mother tell the story of a family facing the monsters that are childhood onset schizoaffective disorder and gastroparesis so severe that it requires feeding tube. Chapter 2 left off with Destiny at their children's psychiatric partial hospital program, where after group therapy sessions, Destiny decides to tell her parents about the frightening hallucinations and the way her thoughts get chopped up all inside her head. So, we'll begin reading here. We are in Destiny's perspective. I immediately decided I was going to tell my parents about the voices and how fragmented reality was for me. Maybe that was my answer. Maybe if adults knew the whole story, then they could actually help me. My parents were really smart. My mom was a freelance author that published tons of personal essays and short stories in all different literary journals. She had even been in the New Yorker a couple of times. My dad had a PhD in physics and worked in a research lab. They had to be able to figure out how to help me. Little tendrils of hope were sprouting from deep within me. Hold on, sorry. This wasn't going to be easy. I was going to have to brave the screens of the bad man and the storyteller, but I was going to do this. I was all gung-ho and ready, but I knew I needed the right time. When I first got home, my mom had a bunch more writing to submit to her editor, and my dad was napping. I figured I approached him after dinner and went up to my room to keep myself busy. Feeling excited, I lined up all my stuffed animals with Blinky front and center and decided to put on a dance show for them. I had been in dance classes since I was old enough to walk without hanging on to furniture. When I was 7 years old, I qualified for the dance team. At first, my mom didn't let me participate. But then, a few months later, when she saw the longing in my eyes as I watched the team practice in room 107, she finally let me sign up, and I felt like a superstar getting on the stage during competitions, dancing my heart out, doing the routines we had been practicing for months, to music we were allowed to help pick out ourselves. I always pretended I was just dancing in my room, in front of Blinky and the rest of my stuffies, until the end, when I would smile, a beaming smile at the judges, and soak in all the applause that was for me. I often won trophies when I competed in solo competitions, and our studio often won the group division. Dr. Langley had forced me to stop dancing and all other physical activities until I gained some weight. I felt like a part of my body had been amputated when I couldn't get to practice my dance team. But at least I could still practice in my room. Closing my eyes, I pretended I was on stage performing. I could almost hear the music. I did a front handspring into a spin, into a kick. As I landed the kick, I felt the tape come off my cheek. Almost in slow motion, I felt my NJ tube slide out my nose. It was slimy and nasty tasting as it rose out of my throat. Frantically, I tried to shove it back in, but then I sneezed a powerful sneeze, and the whole thing came out. I was left there, in the middle of my bedroom, holding the tube that was supposed to be threaded into my intestines. This was really bad. I didn't know what to do. How was I going to explain this? The only thing to do was to tell the truth. As I walked down the stairs, my whole body felt heavy. And not just because of all the tube feeds that had been going through my tube all day. My mom saw me before I got all the way down the stairs. "Did you pull that out?" my mom asked. "No," I tried to tell her. "It fell out." How did a tube that was all the way in the middle of your small intestines fall out? My mom demanded. "It did," I insisted. "I was dancing and the tape came off and it slipped. And then I sneezed and it just came out." "Destiny," my mom paused. "I'm telling the truth," I told her. "Destiny, I'm upset that you pulled the tube out, but I'm even more upset that you're lying to me about what happened," Mom said. "I'm not lying," I started to cry. "I'm not." My mom just shook her head. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I was telling the truth, and my mom didn't believe me. What if I told her the truth about the bad man and the storyteller, and she didn't believe me about that either? I decided that telling her about that was no longer a safe option. Sadly, I walked back up the stairs. And now we're going to switch to her mom's perspective. Mom: "Halfway through the year, when Destiny was 12, the overdoses started. I could read it off her face when she had overdosed. Her skin would turn white, almost bluish tint, making her freckles stand out all the more prominently. Her normally bright blue eyes would get huge and fill up with a sad kind of pain that seared my heart. Even though she would not make eye contact with me, she would stare intently at her feet. Her long, curly red hair would be falling in her face, unbrushed and wild, and she would speak in a whisper. The first overdose was on 30 of her prescription Paxil. I drove her to the hospital, where they made her drink a thick, gritty slurry of activated charcoal that had her projectile vomiting for the next 2 hours and having black diarrhea for the next 2 days. They monitored her for hours. By the time psych crisis came, she was sleeping. I promised to lock up all the medication in the house again, and they sent her back home with me. The next overdose was a bottle of Tylenol, then Benadryl, then aspirin. She would pick them up on her long bike rides, or get them from friends, or sneak out at night to buy them. We put more and more rules into place to try to stop the flurry of overdoses, but she always managed to find ways around them. By then, Destiny was seeing therapist number 10. Her name was Mary, and she was supposed to specialize in children with PTSD. Destiny had never spoken about any specific trauma occurring at any point in her life. But when she had been at University Hospital at age 10, and the psychiatrist had told her she wanted to help her feel better, Destiny had responded to her that she couldn't feel better because she was scheduled to die. "Did someone tell you that you were scheduled to die?" the psychiatrist had asked her. Destiny had nodded yes, and they returned to rocking back and forth and moaning. No one could get any further response out of her. Ever since then, Alan and I had been convinced that someone had been abusing her. We had been so convinced that we had moved from Pennsylvania to Connecticut to get Destiny away from whoever this abuser was. However, when we had questioned the psychiatrist at University Hospital on whether or not she thought Destiny had been abused, she said that the psychological testing was non-conclusive. Her discharge paperwork did say that she had a diagnosis of childhood onset schizophrenia, but Alan and I immediately dismissed this idea as preposterous. Of course her daughter wasn't schizophrenic. That was a diagnosis homeless people living on the streets carried, not our 10-year-old daughter. About 4 months after we started seeing Mary, Destiny overdosed on my Aunt Kat and Uncle Charlie's med cabinet while we were there for a visit. Several weeks before the incident, Mary told us that Destiny was claiming that she heard voices. Mary explained to us that she thought Destiny was saying this as an excuse. Mary said that Destiny was trying to blame her behavior on something else other than herself, and that she probably got the idea of hearing voices from one of the other older kids on the last psychiatric unit she was on. Besides, true psychosis is very rare in children. Destiny is claiming she's heard the voices since she was around 5. I doubt that a 5-year-old was actually hearing voices. She probably had imaginary friends that she's mixing up with hearing voices, Mary explained to us over the phone. I'm just letting you know this, because if she starts talking about the voices, you should know that they're probably just serving as an excuse for her behavior. I trusted Mary. She was a licensed psychologist after all. But Destiny never brought up the topic of the voices with us at any point. So I just left the issue alone. Even though she didn't mention voices, I did notice that Destiny, who was often quiet anyway, had shut down completely. Every time we asked her if she was okay, we were prepared for her to bring up the issue of the voices. But she never said a thing about them, just gave us a dejected shrug. That day at my Aunt Kat and Uncle Charlie's house, I had somehow been ignoring all the warning signs. I'd been paying attention to Mary, the professional, instead of Destiny, my daughter, who I should have known better than anyone else. I didn't get suspicious when she went to use the bathroom. I only started to get worried when she didn't come down for over half an hour. After being lulled into a false sense of security by the other overdoses that had always resulted in her drinking charcoal, flushing it out, and being fine, I took my time getting her to the ER. She completely passed out on the way there. I then floored the gas pedal and began running every red light and stop sign. When we pulled into the emergency room entrance, I saw a security guard and flagged him down in a panic, telling him, I need help for my daughter. Yesterday. He took one look at her and then went inside for a second. Moments later, a bunch of people came rushing out with a stretcher. They yanked her out of the car, rushed her in, and immediately dropped a breathing tube down her throat into her lungs because she had stopped breathing and had no gag reflex. Her blood pressure was tanking as well. They were cutting off her clothes, making incisions in her neck and threading IV tubing in, then stitching it into place. They were inserting catheters, putting a line in her wrist that they were calling an arterial line, hooking her up to monitors, rushing tons of IV bags into her with what they were calling pressure bags and boluses, injecting all different medications through the new line in her neck that had 3 different ports drawing blood multiple times. Nurses, aides, and doctors were swarming the whole room. No one could tell me if she was going to live or not. Hours later, they got her stabilized enough that they could bring her to the pediatric intensive care unit. Alan and I sat vigil by her bed in the pediatric intensive care unit for almost 5 days before they were able to take her off of life support. When we asked her why she had done it, she mumbled that she had just wanted to die. The same thing she had said about the other overdoses. But I knew my daughter. I knew something else was going on in that troubled little red head of hers. Once Destiny was considered to be stable enough medically, she was transferred to the regular pediatric floor for a few days, and then to Wintree's Hospital's adolescent psych unit. While she was at Wintree Hospital, we got repeated phone calls of her biting herself in the arms so deeply she bled, pulling out fistfuls of her own hair, punching the wire mesh-covered windows so hard they grated her knuckles like cheese, smashing her head against the wall when they locked her in the quiet room, trying to run off the unit every time the doors opened, screaming and crying inconsolably, and even hiding in empty drawers in her room, and somehow getting the drawer to close with her in it, so that they couldn't find her for over an hour. At least once or twice a day, she got so out of control that they were needing to restrain and sedate her. I've been hearing two men's voices that no one else can hear since I was a little kid, the bad man and the storyteller. Plus, I hear whisper and chatter that I can't tell her from one voice to the next. They scream at me and tell me to do things that I don't want to do. And if I don't listen, they get louder and louder and punish me. I also sometimes see things no one else can see, like blood and cameras on the walls. Sometimes it's too hard to know what's from the bad man's reality and what's from the right reality. I hate it, Destiny tried to explain to me. When she told me this, everything just all clicked. I suddenly understood the constant freakouts, starting at age 5, her inability to console herself, all of the suicide attempts, the periods where she got so distant and didn't seem to be comprehending anything we were saying to her, and her fearfulness. I was terrified of losing my daughter to this mental illness monster that was attempting to swallow her whole. Alan and I requested a family meeting. We do not believe that Destiny has a real psychotic disorder. We believe that she is manufacturing symptoms to cover up her behavior, or as an attempt to deflect responsibility off of herself. She states that she hears voices, but when asked about them, she shuts down and can't even tell us what they say. But I do hear them. I'm not lying. Destiny's voice was desperate. Please, she cried. You have to believe me. I'm scared, and I'm not making this up. I just couldn't talk about them before because the bad man was screaming too loud since he didn't want me to say anything about him. We're not going to engage in this discussion, Susan, the social worker, told her firmly. You believe me, right, Mom? Destiny asked me, almost pleading. I hesitated. I was so torn. On the one hand, Destiny seemed so sincere, and everything she had described was so detailed. It was too specific to be something she had just dreamed up in her head. And her description of her experience just plain made sense. It explained everything. On the other hand, licensed professionals who had been in the field of child psychiatry since before Destiny was born were telling me that she couldn't be having these symptoms. What was I supposed to think? Please, Mom, I'm telling the truth, Destiny cried, at a loss. I just looked down. Destiny continued to see Mary when she was discharged from Wintry Hospital after being put on a medication called Seroquel to help with her mood swings and being switched from Paxil to Prozac. Initially, Destiny responded well to the med adjustment, but once she got home, she retreated further and further into herself. I would go to her room to check in on her and find her lying in bed, curled up around Blinky, whispering inaudibly and tapping her knee over and over. Sometimes she wouldn't even register that I'd been in to check on her. Destiny went back to Wintry Hospital, once for another overdose, and once for attempting to cut off her breast with a pair of freshly sharpened, cooked quilting scissors that left a long, deep gash, draining pus and infection. Both times, Destiny needed to be restrained and sedated multiple times. Both times, they continued to insist that she was manufacturing symptoms. Wintry Hospital also tried to convince us that Destiny had borderline personality disorder and needed to be in their residential treatment program for 12 to 18 months. Alan and I knew we couldn't lock away our child for 12 to 18 months and told Susan, the social worker there, absolutely not. She looked at us like we were crazy. We compromised and decided to start Destiny in outpatient DBT therapy instead, with therapist number 11. Destiny went through therapist number 11 to 13 over the next 2 years. She continued with her revolving door of emergency room visits and psych hospital missions as well. She also continued to battle her gastroparesis on top of everything else. She had multiple hospital admissions due to electrolyte imbalances, bowel obstructions, anemia, dehydration, and just plain getting sick from starvation. On and off from the time she was 10 until she was 16. She had about 17 different NJ tubes. Sometimes the hospital would send her home with an NJ tube, and we would get supplies sent to us monthly. We would get boxes of a tube feeding pump, an IV pole, a backpack for Destiny to put her tube feeding bags and pump into so she didn't have to be connected to the IV pole all the time. They would also send her syringes to use to flush the tube and push medications through it, and into Destiny's intestine and titer to tape her tube to her cheek. At first, they set Destiny up with visiting nursing, but then, after Destiny had been on NJ feeds for several months, they just taught me how to run the pumps, set up the tube feeds, hook her up and disconnect her, as well as how to give her medications through the tube. Hang on 1 second, guys. Sorry. Even with the tube feeding, Destiny still would end up with electrolyte issues, requiring IV potassium or other IV electrolytes or IV fluids quite often. She also required multiple emergency surgeries to remove dead bowel following bowel perforations due to liquid she drank, sitting in her stomach too long and causing feeding sores. Masses of undigested fibers that can develop in the digestive tract and need to be surgically removed. And then a blockage, and then her bowel would perforate, which basically meant it would literally explode. I'm afraid to come home from work, Ellen told me one day when Destiny was 15. I never know if you'll be home, or with Destiny in the ER, or the pediatric ICU, or signing her into a psych unit, or his voice broke off. Or something even worse than that, he finished, unable to put into words our worst fears that remain unspoken. We eventually made the most painful decision of our lives and put Destiny on the list to get services from the Department of Mental Health to get her on a waiting list for several residential treatment programs of our choosing. Sadly, all the programs we had to choose from were 12 to 18 months long, but we had run out of options. It was residential treatment or lose our daughter to this monster of an illness forever. And that is the end of that chapter. So, I'll stop reading here. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Love y'all. So tune in next time.